Hello, and welcome to 001 Radio. This is episode 4, technically 3, but we're counting the update video last week as one. This week, I've got two amazing guests with me. First, I have Wyatt, who is new to the show. Say hello,
What's
Wyatt.
up?
All right.
I
Now, I have I can't believe we got him. I'm so happy. It is Carl Weezer.
Hey guys, how's it going?
It's not actually Carl Weezer. It's Alex. You might remember him from 2 weeks ago.
Hello again.
Great.
can't.
I don't think any of us were prepared for that. All right. So, we have our nice little game. Alex, you've played this before. We're gonna have it's basically two truths and a lie. Or well, it's one truth and two lies. So we're doing it the opposite way. So I want you specifically, Wyatt, to pick out what of these three news articles is a real news article and which isn't. All right. So
Okay.
first we have Boris Johnson, who is the British Prime Minister, is released from hospital after defunding it and shutting it down. That's our first article. Our second article is a Japanese mayor says men should go grocery shopping during the pandemic as women take too long. And our third
I'm not even gonna touch that. Not even gonna touch
Our third
that.
article is man just buying one of every cleaning product in case Trump announces it's a coronavirus cure.
Are we talking real legitimate articles or real as in this could be posted by The Onion?
Oh no, two of these are from The Onion. One of them is real.
The last one definitely sounds
Right.
like an Onion article. That one was my favorite, but it definitely sounds like an Onion article.
Well, did you hear what the news that Trump said? I think it was a Twitter video where he was asking his doctors to look into some way of making an injection out of like cleaning products.
Wait, is that
just-
one
That's
real?
real.
Look on Lysol.
I'm not saying the article is real, but that is a real thing that Trump said a few days ago.
It unfortunately
Importantly, he
is.
did not encourage people to inject themselves with bleach, as many people have said. But many of the headlines from that were Trump encouraging people to inject themselves with bleach.
Wow. That's the thing about the Onion, though. They'll take something that's completely like they'll make a fake news story, and it'll be so ridiculous, but they'll make it seem very like legitimate
Yeah.
because they try and pair it with something that's just as ridiculous, you know?
So what's your pick of these three?
Mm,
For which one is real? Both of you can have a pick.
I'm gonna go with the first one.
The Boris
I'm-
Johnson is real.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna go along with Boris Johnson as well.
Yeah.
That article is from The Onion.
Oh my god.
Now, of the other two, which one do you think is real?
I was really sure of myself there. I'll go with the second one, I guess.
The just buying one of every cleaning product in case
No,
Trump
no, no,
announces it's a coronavirus.
Oh, the second one.
Oh, the second one of the three.
Yeah, yeah.
How about you, Alex?
I'm going with the cleaning product.
So, Wyatt, you're on the money. The Japanese mayor is a real news article from CNN. Important note here: we don't actually go through and read these articles, so I have no clue how true this is. But that is the headline.
Wow.
And the first line of it is the mayor of Japan's third largest city is facing a public backlash. So I assume he did say this. The Boris Johnson is just a joke about the British Prime Minister. And the last article was an Onion article. The funny thing is, this article came out a month ago. And
No.
a few days ago was when the whole bleach thing happened.
Oh my god.
So,
As much as I love the Onion, they almost need to stop because at this point, people are just going to start taking them seriously. Like people who don't know better, they're going to start killing people.
You're giving him ideas!
Oh, no.
Stop!
see, this is why we like this game. We always get to see weird things. All right. So the last few weeks, we've been talking a lot about quarantine, and I think we're all kind of getting tired of that, and just reminding ourselves of the sad situation of the world. So this week, we're going to take a turn and talk about some things we've been doing to distract ourselves from the quarantine, specifically with a focus on video games. Have fun. Do you two like video games?
They're all right.
Yeah.
They're okay.
Oh,
For context,
sometimes.
everyone here, all three of us are currently working on a game together.
So yeah, you know what? They're fun.
Yeah,
They're fun
great.
little distractions. I mean, you know, you will become incredibly violent from playing them, as we all know. But you know,
Absolutely.
before you become really violent, they're a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And that's what this podcast is about, violence. So, specifically, this week, I think it would be fun to have a conversation about how games do narrative and what you personally enjoy in them from our different perspectives. So I'm going to open it up. Have either of you played a story-heavy game recently that you've really been enjoying and want to talk about?
I finished two very story-heavy games recently. I finished Control, and I also finished Outer Worlds more recently, actually. Um, Control is one of those games where the central story isn't nearly as interesting as literally everything else, because it's a game where it's very much like reading SCP, right? Where it's like you get all these different entries about these different magical items and stuff like that, and they kind of they go into detail on what the item does, its like place of origin, its effects on people and stuff like that, and it's really interesting. Uh, and that was more fun going around and collecting all that stuff than the actual central story, which is like kind of boring and not fantastic. But just going around and getting all those different like log entries and stuff was super cool.
Yeah. How about you, Alex?
Um, not necessarily a new game, but I think this is my 7th time now playing through Uncharted 4.
Ah,
That's been on my backlog for a while. And I've wanted to go, especially with now they made the collection free.
Yeah.
I think it's for anyone with a PlayStation. I don't think it's limited to PS Plus. I could be wrong on that though. They made the entire collection free, which is really really cool. Because I believe one of the PS Plus games is Uncharted 4, so you can now play through the entire franchise without having to pay for it if you have PS Plus. Well, you're kind of paying for it then, but
Mm.
for the
with,
sake
with
of
the
the argument,
Yeah.
with the exception of Lost Legacy, which is
with the
not
exception of Lost Legacy, yeah.
which I have played and isn't like I liked it, but it isn't super like it isn't a necessity in terms of like understanding the story or even it being that good. Like it's good. It's just it's not a must play for me.
Understandable. Yeah, and I think I don't think I've talked about this on the podcast yet, but what I've been recently sinking my teeth into is the Final Fantasy VII remake, which does some pretty interesting stuff that I think we're going to talk about a little bit. But first, I want to talk about Control because I think it does some really unique stuff with storytelling through methods that are usually seen as a negative, which is like audio logs and text logs and stuff that you have to find and then go out and read. That I actually think in that specific game work really well.
Yeah, there's definitely games where they try and do the whole like, oh, it's a bare bones central story, but we're gonna try and enrich it with all this other lore and stuff like that. And some games do it really well. Like obviously Dark Souls was like one of the
Yeah, Dark
first
Souls is
big
pretty well
games
known
to
for it.
do it really well. And then there's other games like Destiny that just completely fail in terms of having like a
Grimoire
story.
cards.
I will say all of their lore is in the actual game now, which is very nice of them. It only took them almost 6 years, so well done. But and I did a whole presentation on this last semester, but even having all of that lore for you to read, there's going to be a lot of people that won't read it and they won't get any emotional resonance out of the story whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. I
And I
know
think
that was a big conversation talking piece with the Destiny expansion that released, where one of their main characters died in the trailer. I'm forgetting the name.
Cade.
Yeah, I know Cade died. What was the name of the expansion?
Oh,
Forsaken.
Forsaken. That's right.
Yeah.
The one that I am currently trying to play through.
Yeah, it's definitely it's like the best Destiny 2 expansion. I think it put like a lot of the mechanics in a good place, but and I can tell that they tried with the story. Not that they did a particularly great job, especially with the ending, which completely robs the story of any kind of just not even
Yeah,
emotional weight, but also the whole revenge part of it is completely just it completely falls apart at the end.
yeah,
And I've already talked about this, so Ryan, this is going to be a bit of a retread for you, but like that's even if you like have any connection with Kate as a character to begin with, which if you read a lot of the grimoire, I think it's just called lore collections or whatever now. Like if you read a lot of that, I'm sure you got a lot about his character through that, and I've read a bit of it and it's interesting. But if you're someone who doesn't have the patience to read and just wants to play the game, you're not going to get any kind of emotional weight out of his death
yeah.
whatsoever. Like it completely falls flat. I know it did for me at least.
Yeah, I think for me the biggest issue was that Cade died in the trailer. So
Oh yeah, yeah,
you go in knowing this is gonna happen, and yet the game still plays it off as this huge, like, impactful moment. But everyone knew for like more than a month leading up to the release that this was going to happen.
yeah, yeah. And like honestly, like it would have been surprising. Like it still I don't think would have like because I'm still not connected to him as a character, but it definitely would have been surprising and shocking. And still would be a ridiculous decision because he was the only character with any he was the only person in the world with any kind of personality because
Yeah, I
I
think
still
that's my biggest problem with Cade's death is that it is a really really good narrative punch if you read the lore. That caveat there is important.
no exactly,
But
and
it
that's the point.
also there's no character that, like, a lot of what I felt after playing through Forsaken was that there wasn't really any characters I was interested in enough to keep me playing the game.
I would say Drifter is interesting. He kind of fills that like charismatic kind of rogue
He does, but
character.
he's unimportant. Like,
He's
for
very
the story we've seen so far,
I
and it
also
looks
hate
like
his
they're
voice.
gearing up to make him more important. But
well. That's the thing. That's the one of the most frustrating things with how Destiny does its story is that it's like, oh, there's this really cool thing. It's going to happen. It's going to be really cool, and it happens. Don't. It's going to be so cool, and they never actually get to any of the cool parts. They just kind of keep saying that things are going to happen, and then nothing ever actually happens. Like Shadowkeep as an expansion was just like 4 hours of just build up to something that was much much cooler. Like you remember how those like pyramid things that they keep teasing at the end of every expansion, like leading up to Shadowkeep, like at the end they always have these like
yeah,
flying pyramids.
Yeah,
Like they finally you finally go inside of this and it doesn't really tell you anything. It's just, oh, this thing's going to happen, which is really cool. And more so than anything, it's just a build up to the raid.
yeah. I think
I
Alex
have
has something to say for
faith
that.
that they can at least do something to fix it in the next big expansion with the evil triangles.
And
Love
saying
evil
evil,
triangles.
yeah, and like saying evil triangles, it sounds kind of silly, but they actually, from a design perspective, they're very menacing. And there was a great moment in Shadowkeep where it kind of you go into this little ravine and it kind of reveals this flying pyramid thing, and it looks really intimidating.
I mean,
And
pyramids are pretty commonly used as, like, a weird menacing thing.
it's
Like,
used in
even
control too.
going back like 20 years to Evangelion, even if it's a little older than 20 years, but
Oh yeah,
one of the first big enemies in that show is a floating rhombus, which looks more menacing than it sounds.
Yeah. Well, yeah, yeah. And they use it in control as well.
Yeah, Control has a lot of that.
The what is it? The board is like that
Yeah,
inverted triangle. Yeah.
inverted pyramid, I think, is the term they use.
Right. Well, there's a lot of terms that I can never keep straight. I would say that's probably one of the biggest hurdles for control stories, that there's so many different terms like objects of power, altered world events, like all these different terms and concepts that you have to understand before you really know what the building is about and what this whole bureau is about. And it's a little confusing at first.
Yeah,
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
I think in the case of Control, that works to the game's favor because I think the type of game it is, at least narratively, appeals to people that like that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's for the SCP people who like just
Yeah,
reading
absolutely.
weird like all like the way I described it once was a bunch of crazy like science fiction magical concepts wrapped up in bureaucracy is like the best way to describe it, because it's through all this like there's a bunch of like inked out sections, and it's everything's labeled and revert and like refers back to other documents and stuff, but they're talking about these crazy weird like sci-fi concepts, and it's really interesting the way that it's written.
Yeah, so actually, I'm curious if either of you has any experience with SCP, having read any of the SCP stuff that's come out.
I had no idea what it was until someone described Control's world as like giant SCP, and I was like, "What the heck is that?" So like I looked it up later, and it was really interesting.
Yeah, I saw like one Markiplier video.
Yeah, there was the free SCP game that released a while ago that
Yeah.
became
It
pretty popular.
it definitely feels like the writers of Control just had SCP, like the website, open in one monitor while they were
Yeah,
working on the story at all times, because a lot of the log entries and stuff definitely feel like
especially with
that.
all the redacted, like the red tape and
Oh
the
yeah,
black
yeah,
marked out stuff. That's
yeah.
a very common SCP thing. Yeah, I'd encourage anyone listening to this to go through the SCP wiki when you're bored one day and just like read a random article because they're all very weird and interesting.
Yeah, and if you like that kind of stuff, you'll probably like Control.
Oh yeah,
So
I would say you definitely like Control. It plays pretty heavily into that.
yeah, it's very different for a Remedy game, because like going into it, I was like, all right, I know clearly what a Remedy game is. They're beautiful looking, like third person linear story based shooters. That's what they've always made, from what they started with like Max Payne all the way up to Quantum Break. That's what they've always been. And this was so different to what they normally make. I
Yeah,
was like really taken aback by that. And I liked it. Actually, I liked it a lot.
yeah. I think Control is of the things I've played that Remedy has made my favorite thing. Although I still haven't beaten it.
The ending is not great.
Yeah, I
I'll
have heard
say
the
that.
ending isn't great, but I have heard the DLCs are very good, or at
I
least the
haven't
one that is out yet.
I haven't done the first one because it feels very much just like what's the term I'm looking for? Not roguelike, but you're basically just going in and you're kind of fighting off waves of enemies and trying to survive as long as you can. And the rewards you get from that are like new weapons and like a new outfit and stuff, which is cool. But speaking as someone who's finished like the story and most of the side content, once I get all of those things, I don't really see the point, because there's no new game plus or anything like that. So I don't really see the point in getting all of those things when there's nothing to do after you've gotten them.
Yeah,
You
I
know?
know what you mean.
But
So
obviously, there's going to be more expansions, with one that I'm particularly excited for.
yeah, I'm excited about
Very good.
what that game is going to be doing next.
Yeah.
But now I think we should pivot. And so we were talking about Control, which is a very abstracted storytelling method and doesn't
Mhm.
have too many traditional cutscenes. It's got a lot of like weird cutaways and inner mind monologues that happen.
Very trippy.
Yeah,
Very
very
trippy.
trippy. But Alex, you've been playing something that doesn't do that and is a lot more cinematic. Is probably the word. How's
Yeah,
Uncharted 4?
it's oh god, seventh time through it. It's still I wouldn't say it has um it tries to play itself emotionally, and there are interesting parts, but it's like if a Michael Bay movie had good acting.
Mm. I kind of love that description.
And good writing.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
my experience with Uncharted is I've played one all the way through. I'm
I'm
pretty
sorry.
certain. I don't remember if
I
I
hate
actually
one.
beat it. I'm like 95% certain I did.
I hate one so much. I love this series,
I
but
played it
one
a
is
while ago, so
trash.
and I was extremely bored when I played it, so I had a good time with it. But that was a long time ago, and I've played through a decent portion of two, but I played two before I played one on the PS. Was it a PS3 game originally?
I believe it was PS3.
Yeah, so I played that on the PS3, I think around when it came out. And then I played Uncharted 3 a lot more, a lot later on, but I don't think I played more than like a third of the story. So I have a weird sporadic experience with Uncharted.
Huh.
It was
I
enjoyable
so
though.
so Naughty Dog is one of my favorite developers working right now. Last of Us is like one of my favorite games ever made. Uncharted is great. You know, it's definitely like my kind of game, which is those narrative, like story-driven games that focus more on characters and stuff like that.
Yeah, there's a very nice, clear, how Drake's character builds throughout all four of the games, and it comes to a satisfying conclusion in
hmm
four.
hmm
Yeah, that's what I've heard about it, is that it actually is a good ending
Yeah.
for a
Oh,
series, which I think a lot of games struggle with. Like Halo has been kind of going on in this weird amorphous blob of a story for
maybe
Good
we'll get maybe
ending.
we'll get to that
a
a little
while
later.
now.
It's a good ending for a series
Mhm.
that still manages to leave itself open to other entries, sort of like how Lost Legacy
Yeah.
worked, because there's still more adventurers and treasure hunters that you've met along the way with Drake.
I definitely hope they don't have any more stories centered around Nathan. As much as I love that character, I think
Oh
because
no, I
four
don't think they
was
could. I don't think
no,
they could.
because four was such a great way to conclude things. If they kept it going, it would kind of ruin that ending in a way.
Yeah.
I do believe they could do another one with Nadine, though
hmm
Like take
probably not the
another
young
cast
Sully.
member
I
and
would
go with
love
them.
more games about Nadine. I really liked Nadine.
What else was? And there was an Uncharted movie planned
I
Oh
think it's
yeah,
still in production
with
because
Tom
if I'm not
Holland
mistaken, I
playing.
yeah,
watched a
yeah.
Tom Holland interview a little while ago about Spider-Man, and he said they were set to start filming Uncharted right as the coronavirus
Yeah.
pandemic happened.
And
Well, there was also that great Uncharted short with Nathan Fillion
oh
that
Yeah.
came out
yes,
on
I
YouTube,
was
which
just about
was
to say that.
so good. That was perfect.
So
It
maybe it
was
It
wasn't
has
Cade that died, but Nathan.
which so fun fact. So back on Destiny for a split second, just for those of you who don't know, Cade was voiced by Nathan Fillion up until Forsaken, where he was then replaced by Nolan North,
I
who
thought his voice
voices
sounded different.
yeah,
Crap.
who voices Nathan Drake, who then was played in this live action short by my brain hurts.
It keeps
And
going
those two go
around.
round and round.
It's all connected.
my brain hurts. I do kind of find it kind of funny that a whole DLC focused around the death of a character that couldn't even get the actual voice actor for that character.
I'm wondering if it was I'm sure they've talked about this and I just haven't seen it, but I'm wondering if it was that they couldn't get him or if that
That
maybe
was their reason.
that was their reason is they couldn't get him.
But that's also the same reason that they gave when they replaced Peter Dinklage. So
Well, Peter Dinklage actually has a long history of not being a huge fan of video games for some very valid reasons.
then why did they have him? Okay, nope. I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah.
Moving on.
Although when I played Destiny 1, I actually kind of liked Dinklebot.
I liked him
He was
in
very
some.
monotone and not super entertaining, but it was pretty unique.
There are some parts where I thought his voice worked well, and other parts where it was
Yeah.
bad, like bad, not good.
Who did they replace? Was it
Nolan North. They
Nolan
replaced him
North?
with Nolan
Yeah, I was gonna say because Nolan North I think he's more versatile in what he can do, but at the same time, I feel like the voice direction for Destiny when Nolan North came on was pretty much the same as any other robot role, like
He
robot
sounds like
sidekick
constantly
role.
worried.
It's like
I
constantly
think
worried, a little sarcastic.
Yeah.
I feel like Nolan North is pretty much the Jack and Daxter of all trades.
yeah.
Hit him and Troy Baker.
Don't forget Matt Mercer; he's in there too.
Oh yeah,
Mercer's
for
in
like 2
everything now.
seconds.
Yeah, it's weird, especially coming out of especially I've been playing Final Fantasy VII Remake pretty much exclusively, and then now I'm jumping into Persona 5 as I have more time, and I'm starting to recognize voice actors a lot more. And there's this weird thing where Persona 5's voice acting is very good, but there's a bizarre sense of like in Final Fantasy VII Remake, almost everyone is cast perfectly. And many of them are people that aren't super popular. Like I think the voice actress for one of the main characters, this is her first major role, I think,
Oh.
Aerith,
Oh wow. Okay.
and she does a fantastic job. And I think that was really refreshing about it, is I was hearing a lot of new voices,
Hmm.
especially for games. Having come from like playing a lot of games recently, Destiny and Persona, that have voice actors that are pretty well known.
Hmm.
Especially like Uncharted. I know Uncharted has some really good VA too.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, Nolan North. We were joking about it earlier, but he does a very good Nathan Fillion impression, which is like a lot of
Well,
what
or is it Nathan
Nathan.
Fillion doing a Nolan North impression?
Oh God, I
Yeah.
don't even know, but you could definitely tell that that's the kind of like charisma or the kind of personality that they
Yeah.
were channeling with Nathan Drake's character, which is why replacing Nathan Fillion with Nolan North made a lot of sense because he does a very good impression.
Of
So
Nathan Fillion. All
I
right.
speaking of voice actors though, here's something I've been thinking about. So I haven't been able to play it recently, but I was playing Death Stranding, and
Yep.
that stars not only Norman Reedus' voice but also his likeness. And
Yeah.
something I was thinking about is, does it detract from a game at all to have someone who's voicing their character also have that character look like them?
I think it's very different. So, some weird stuff with Death Stranding specifically is that there are a few characters in it that use the likeness of people but not their voices, like Guillermo del Toro.
Hmm.
Really?
His character is not voiced by Guillermo del Toro.
But he looks just
Huh.
like
He
him.
looks just like him though.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's a discussion that kind of ties in a lot more with film and TV than games, because these characters are very clearly resembling real people. They're based after them. It's being handled like a TV show,
Hmm.
and there's even advertisements for Nolan for Norman Reedus' TV show The Ride when you
Right.
take a shower, which I don't know. Personally, I find it hilarious, and I think it adds a weird bit of Kojima-ness to the game.
Hmm.
But if it was a more standard story and not quite as like outlandish as Death Stranding is, I think it would bother me a lot more.
Because I kind of go back and forth where, like, if obviously like if an actor's appearance fits the role, then that's great. But I feel like because with video games you can have your characters look however they want, so you can perfectly fit it to the role. It's almost a wasted opportunity to just style your character after whoever's voicing them, because I feel like you could have a design for a character like appearance, and maybe this is probably more of an artist thing, so I'll let the artist talk. But personally, I was like, I feel like it's almost a wasted opportunity to have a character just resemble the voice actor, because I feel like you could have a lot more artistic freedom in terms of getting the character to look the way that you want them to, rather than having to adhere to the voice actor's appearance.
Well, there's a lot of things where if you're using voice actors' normal voice, like Norman Reedus doesn't put on any specific accent or anything for that. Usually, the character artists, and this is planned out beforehand, but if that's not the case, then usually, certain voices can fit with certain characters, and it fits into a lot of visual appeal and things like that. But you can't model a character that looks like a little girl for Norman Reedus' voice.
Right, right.
I don't know if anyone was going to try, it'd be Kojima.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it
Yeah.
definitely goes along with like in voice acting. Typically, the actors aren't doing their normal voice; they're doing some form of a directed voice. Like something I noticed is Erica Lindbeck, who's a very popular voice actress, especially in JRPGs. She does a character in Final Fantasy VII Remake and a character in Persona 5. They sound completely different. And you can notice it's the same person if you've heard both of them and are aware it's the same person. But I think just if you were just playing those two games and didn't know, I don't think you'd be able to tell. And in those cases, like the characters have extremely different designs. So in that scenario, it's like you wouldn't use Erica Lindbeck's likeness for that because the
Oh yeah.
character doesn't that voice doesn't sound like it's coming from her.
Right.
Whereas
And
with like Nolan or not, I keep saying Nolan North with Norman Reedus, that is just his normal voice.
yeah. And the other thing I'll say too is that Kojima very much tries to resemble his games off of movies, so it kind of makes sense that he uses
Yeah,
big like movie stars to market the movie and have them be kind of the main characters, because that's part of the shtick that he's going for. Even
it's
though the
also
way that
kind of more
he
recent.
Yeah, and even though the way they frame his cutscenes aren't like movies, that's a whole separate discussion.
Yeah.
I read too much into that man's work sometimes.
It's a lot of fun though. But I think
Oh god.
if I'm correct, I think the first time there was really a major character that had an extreme resemblance to their voice actor in Kojima's stuff specifically was Kiefer Sutherland in MGSV.
Yes.
I don't know. Did he look exactly? Because he
Not
still
exactly,
looked like,
but he looked a lot more similar to Kiefer Sutherland
I
than
would, yeah. Because
not.
I think the resemblance of Boss was like still kept, but there was definitely more of like Keith Sutherland's like
Yeah.
facial, like more inspiration there. But even then, it's not like a one-to-one likeness of Keith Sutherland
Yeah,
because
like
they
there's
still
definitely a
have
lot of
to
creative liberties.
they because he's still because Boss still definitely looks like Boss from the other games. It's just you can kind of tell. It's almost like Keith Sutherland wearing makeup or like wearing
Yeah, wearing like
like
a costume.
to look like Boss. Yeah.
Yeah. I think especially with something that ties into that with Metal Gear specifically is the change from having David Hayter to Kiefer Sutherland. I can't say his last name for some reason.
Mhm.
I think most people would probably agree that Kiefer Sutherland is a traditionally better voice actor, at least in the
Mhm.
voice with the voice direction he was given, in that it sounds more like a film. Whereas David Hayter is a very gamey voice, like he kind of hypes it
Yeah.
up a little bit,
That's a good
and
way to put
he's
it.
got a super recognizable like Colonel, I'm sneaking around, like
Yeah.
that kind
It's
of
more over
growl
the
to
top.
it.
It's more over the top.
But I think, in my legitimate opinion, I prefer Hayter's voice acting to
Well,
Sutherland's.
it's also the kind of thing where like when you have inconsistent voice actors, like because the voice of a character is so important to the identity of that character, and it's the same thing when people were complaining about Frank West in Dead Rising, where not only was it a different voice actor, I think it was a different voice actor. I could be wrong about that, but like his character was way off, and a huge issue with that is because they had a different voice actor.
Yeah,
And I think it's weird with games specifically that like I feel like even more so than like movies and things like that, that a character's voice makes up such a big part of their of their character overall.
yeah,
And so I feel like changing that is like going a step too far in terms of like making changes from the other games.
yeah. And I don't think it's that Sutherland did a bad job or that Kojima was taking it in a bad direction. I just
Oh, not
think
at all.
that for me personally, um, you can kind of logic it away as Venom Snake is a very different, like, generational character compared to Metal Gear Solid 3 Big Boss and Peace Walker Big Boss, because the games were made at very different times
Hmm.
and different priorities were definitely had by the dev team.
Hmm.
I don't know. I think it was more fun with Hater voicing it.
It's definitely more like over the top, and I think it's funny because I was about to say that it's like, oh well, MGS5 isn't quite as over the top as the other games, but the game literally starts
It's
with
very over the top. Yeah, it's
with
very,
a giant flaming Pegasus
yeah.
and a
That
giant
game
flame whale. So like
is
I
almost
don't know.
more over the top.
Well, it's weird because it's like it's a gorgeous looking game, especially for 2015, and just playing it normally is like, okay, this looks like fairly realistic military stuff, and then they just bring out the weird stuff, and you're like, wait, what? Wait a minute, what's going on? Because that was my first Metal Gear game, so I had no idea what I was getting into in
Yeah,
terms of like,
then again, Death Stranding is pretty much the same way, where you take
yeah,
some like very realistic elements and then just completely mess with the world and
yeah,
apply these crazy rules to it, which I think is very fun.
and taken out of context, it's absolutely like
It's gold. It's pure gold.
insane. But in context, it's weird because you kind of take it more seriously. Like
But
when you're
suspension of
actually playing the
disbelief. It's like when
game.
you're
Yeah,
watching Star Wars, you believe that these characters are real,
you
assuming it's
believe that
a good
space
Star
wizards
Wars.
are real.
Yeah, you believe in the space wizards. Which I think that actually links back pretty nicely to our Uncharted talk, in that Uncharted has
Oh
a
yeah.
nice little end to the series and knows when to stop with its characters. Star Wars doesn't.
Yeah.
No, neither does Halo.
Yeah, well, Halo also has the problem, a similar issue to Star Wars, in that it swapped writers pretty drastically.
Well, it's interesting because whatever you have to say about Halo 4, in my opinion, it has one of the best stories in the entire franchise. Like Halo 4 story is incredible.
Yeah, I think a big part of that issue is that Halo 4 is treated as if it's an ending for a character, and then that character is immediately brought back.
Well, yeah, and it's like you say, because the writer for Halo 4, like his mom was going, his mom was diagnosed with oh, what was it? I don't remember, but it was some sort of mental disease, right? And so a lot of the writing and the inspiration for Halo 4 story was based off of that, which is really touching, and you can tell because
Alzheimer's.
Yeah, it
that's
definitely
right.
feels
Thank
like
you.
Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I think that was kind of the secret sauce of that story, was that it came from a place of someone who has a close loved one that was going through that, and I think that really helped with the story in a lot of ways. And with Halo 5's story, that writer was no longer working on the story, and so they were left with whatever the heck Halo 5 story is,
Yeah.
which is a complete disaster. And that's coming from someone who actually likes Halo 5, but not for the story.
Yeah. That actually ties pretty well into what I want to transition to here. So, have either of you played Final Fantasy before? Any Final Fantasy game?
I played a bit of 15 and I absolutely hated it.
Good, justified opinion.
I played 15 and I've played 6.
6 is a good one. So, all right. That ties in well because I want to talk about Remake a little bit. But first, I want to talk about the original Final Fantasy VII. And a big part of that game's development and how the story kind of formed the way it did was one of the lead writers. It might have been Nojima, the scenario writer. I don't know though, and I don't want to say it was without being certain. Was dealing with the death of a very close family member, and so a lot of that emotion was put into the original game when it came out, which is why it was kind of a landmark title in terms of like treating party members the way it did and having the narrative consequences that a lot of RPGs did not have. I'm avoiding spoilers here, just in case anyone is going to play. Right. Anyone listening is going to play the remake or doesn't want to go in knowing any major events that happen. But
well, that okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So an interesting thing is that along with that, a lot of people are concerned with the remake, which is pretty faithful to the original until the end, where it takes a pretty drastic turn into opening up some new possibilities. Yeah, so I think a lot of people were worried that maybe because the writer does not have that fresh emotional experience in their mind when doing the new scenario writing, that might be affecting how they're writing the story and making them intentionally have less narrative impact because they're not willing to, say, like kill off a character that was going to die or have a villain do something as evil as they were originally doing. A good like out of context scene is in the original. There's a villain who you find. The game is building up to him being a pretty major villain. You find him in the original, and this is only a few hours in, just dead on the floor with a katana in his back. In the remake, they do this scene a little bit differently, where he's alive, and you see him get killed in front of you to build up the bad guy more, the real bad guy more than him. And a lot of people were like, well, that's not quite as ominous as just finding a dead guy with a sword in his back and having no clue what happened.
Well, most of the people who are playing Final Fantasy VII Remake will have known something about the story about this, so there's no use in sort of, I would say, keeping that suspense. Along with, and this is another thing that I think is a good decision as far as they're doing. It's good that they're sort of obviously that one death that we talked about earlier is still most likely going to happen.
Well, that's the thing. Nobody knows. They're introducing uncertainty.
Yeah, but and with that, that's good because you don't want to be rehashing the same plot if you don't have the same inspiration as before. You'd want to go with what you have given to you at that time, so it's more relevant.
Yeah, so I think that ties into what I wanted to talk about, which is, should a game remake be a 1-to-1 remake, or as I think a lot of people have problems with Final Fantasy VII Remake. A lot of people really like it. I'm on the end of liking it a lot. I'm very curious to see where it goes. And my stance on it is that the original exists, right? Like it's a bit dated. The visuals are clearly very 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 early PlayStation 1 visuals. But the game itself and the story stands on its own without the need to be remade. So what is the value in just 1-to-1 remaking something that already exists and is good?
I think if you want a 1-to-1 remaster, that exists, and they're called remasters.
Yeah,
I ruined my own joke.
a
But
1-to-1 remaster.
that's what remasters are for. Is not changing the gameplay or the story, just the visuals.
Yeah, so the
And
the argument I think that I most identify with for this is that in order to faithfully recreate the experience of playing a game that had the impact that Final Fantasy VII did, you need to also recreate the emotions that the game had of like uncertainty, the like oh my god, what's gonna happen next, the draw of where is this story going, what's going to happen, who's like the real villain in the situation.
Oh,
And
that's why you think.
if that's where I'm thinking, like, because remake is being remade by the same team. It's not like a game that's being remade by a different team. These are the same writers. It's Nomura who did the character designs in the original is now back as a director. Nojima, who did the scenario writing for the original, is back as the scenario writer. So the writer is the same. The team is mostly the same. It's clear like people are going to be gone missing because it's an older. Seven is an old game. It's been 20 something years. So it's being clearly remade with a different team, but the people heading it are mostly the same. So it's not like Star Wars where George Lucas is mostly hands off at this point and it's being handed to different writers. These are the same people. And I don't think they want to just recreate the same thing they already did. I think that what their intention is to recreate the feeling that people had when they played the original.
that's the thing for me, is that like when I go into a remake of a game, or I feel like the mindset of a remake is, because I feel like there's no use for a 1-to-1 remake. Like again, I think that's what remasters are for. I think a remake implies that there's a certain amount of reimagining going on,
Yeah.
where I feel like it's not just taking the same game, it's recontextualizing the game for a more modern audience.
So that
Because
actually, I think specifically what you just said about recontextualizing the game, and I think that ties in really well specifically with Final Fantasy VII Remake because there's this weird. For most of the game, things are very similar, but at the start, there's one immediate difference, which people have dubbed plot ghosts. They are essentially weird ghost-looking spirits that fly around the characters when major events are happening and like push them to do certain things. The characters are aware of them, and they're like, "What's going on? Who are these creatures?" And those were not in the original Final Fantasy VII, but events are happening like the original. It's revealed towards the end of the game in like not an offhand dialogue piece, but in a cutscene, one of the characters is like, "What are these?" And the other character is like, "Oh, I saw a vision. These are whispers." And the idea is that they are there to guide fate to its predetermined path, which is where I think Remake is kind of genius. I'm not a huge fan of the implementation of these whispers, but the idea behind the game on a meta level being like, yeah, these are basically the purists of Final Fantasy that are like, the game should happen the way it originally happened, and that's it.
huh.
It introduces this idea that like these spirit ghost weird things are essentially guiding the characters to their predetermined fate as it was in the original game, which is, I think, a crazy idea that's really
Yeah.
entertaining.
That's
That's
really
really
interesting.
cool.
Because
That's
on a
really-
meta level, it's for new players, which is so I never beat the original Final Fantasy. I played a decent portion of it, but like I was a kid. The game is older than I am, so
Right.
so like I never finished it. I do know most of the story though, so coming in as a new person who doesn't know the little details, like I didn't know about a lot of the side characters or major events that happen. Coming in and seeing this stuff for the first time, it's still really interesting because you don't know what's going on. But from the perspective of someone who like knows the story of most of the original, it's bonkers because you're going like, wait a minute, they're recontextualizing the original, and the way the game almost implies that the ending of the original Final Fantasy VII is a bad ending. That the
Ooh.
original game was like what would happen in not the worst case scenario, but not the best case scenario, right? So there's this interesting idea now of like Final Fantasy VII Remake is not just a remake, it is a near direct sequel to this 23-year-old game.
What?
Oh, that's
What?
Which
crazy.
I think is
That's so
bonkers.
cool.
That's nuts.
It's like looking at all the theories about this game, even as someone who's kind of removed from the importance of it to people that grew up with this game, is crazy. And I think it's definitely worth playing through if you're interested in like weird storytelling.
Do you think
Huh.
that because there's only this part of Final Fantasy VII remake, there's only you said about a fifth of it out, I believe.
Yeah, so Midgar in the original game is a good example. Is the demo for Final Fantasy VII Remake is the bombing run mission from the original game.
Mm.
The bombing run in the original game, and I went back and played this about a week ago because I was like, you know what, I think I'm going to play the original and get the full experience so I know exactly what's happening going in. I did that. The bombing run in the original game is maybe 5 minutes long.
Oh,
Maybe. It is
okay. I have
extremely short.
I have played the remake demo.
Yeah.
So that's huh.
So did you fight the boss in the demo?
I did. I did
That
complete
boss in the original literally is done in like 35 seconds
I remember that boss
and doesn't
taking
do
forever.
anything really interesting. In the remake, that's like a 10-minute boss fight. It's jumping on the walls and doing a bunch of crazy stuff.
That was pretty nuts.
None of that is in the original, and it's like that is what I would, if I was a kid playing this game, that's what I would imagine that fight as, which I think
Huh.
is like really cool.
And again, that's what I'm saying in terms of a remake is more about recontextualizing it
Yeah.
for a modern era, because you said it perfectly. A kid who was playing the original Final Fantasy VII back on his or her PlayStation 1, right, would imagine that fight as it is portrayed now. But that's because they had,
Yeah.
that was the best, technology could do at the time. So that's probably in their head what they were imagining. And so a remake, I feel like, needs to change things in order to like fully fulfill the original vision of that game.
Yeah, I think especially so you played the demo, you know Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge are your like side characters there
Hmm.
that are very talkative. They're constantly giving bits about the world and kind of giving you hints as to what's going on.
Right.
In the original, each of them has maybe three to five lines in that section.
Huh.
In the remake, they are constantly talking.
Huh.
And like Jesse has this weird rapport with Cloud. It's very entertaining, and they do things with that in remake where it's kind of just dropped in the original because those characters are side characters. They weren't important past a certain point in the original. Like they're very attached to Midgar, and your party leaves Midgar past a certain point in the original. Like I think it's about 5 to 8 hours in, you leave Midgar in the original. In remake, you spend a good 40 hours there.
Oh my
Wow.
God. There is something to
Um,
be said for taking 1/5 of a game and making it the entire game, but not making it feel like you were skimped out at all.
Yeah, like I do
That's really
not feel like I
impressive.
am missing anything at
That's
the end
really
of
impressive.
having finished it. I think my come out with this was if we get 2 to 3 more games of that quality, I am beyond in.
Yeah.
Like
And it's interesting how they change all. And I guess, story maybe is more like emotionally impactful for people, but I never saw as much backlash in terms of when they had that combat system, like when they completely changed combat, which for someone like me
yeah,
who's incredibly impatient and does not have the time for turn-based combat, I absolutely despise turn-based. I can't stand it. But this new combat system, again, recontextualizing it for modern times, I was like, oh, this actually looks really
well, the
interesting and
interesting thing
something.
is Final Fantasy VII Original is not turn based. It's active time, which is slightly different in that it's basically the way you play is turn based, but there is time does not pause. So when you're
Oh,
selecting your attacks and everything, you have to do it quickly, or else you will lose the enemy will just attack you twice in the span it would have
should,
taken you to get one thing off.
shows
Oh
you how much I
wow.
know about the original.
Yeah. Well, it looks turn-based from the outset.
Right.
I think the way they've done it in Remake is a very good evolution of that idea to where you can pause the game and like think about what you want to do, or you can play it like an action game.
What people have kept telling me was that it's like 15's combat system, but like more fully realized, which is exciting to me because 15's combat was terrible. But I was like,
I
you have a
hated that
really
you held the button down to do
it's
things.
bad. But I was thinking like you have a really great uh concept for a combat system here,
Yeah.
and I can see this working really well. You didn't do it this time. It's bad, but keep going with this because I think you could do
Keep
something
at
really
it. I think
interesting
it's
with
something
that.
good.
Yeah, and it seems like I wasn't super like into the demo for 7. Maybe I don't know. I'm assuming it gets better, but
Yeah,
I
it
was like,
definitely
yeah, this
does.
combat definitely seems a lot better than
Yeah, the
like
combat
the
continually
fully.
gets more complex. Every single weapon has a skill tree, and all of them are viable at any
What?
point in the game,
What?
which
That's
is
insane.
so
Oh
much
my
fun.
god.
I love the
Um,
weapon system.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Getting back to story bits. Oh, what's
Yeah, you good?
okay? Yeah, my mic went a little funky for a bit. Um, with the implication of the remake being a sequel, do you think that with the installation of further titles of this re-exploring, what could or would have happened in the original game, um, something that's important in a lot of story-based games, dialogue and branching choices and things like that. Do you think that that is a possibility that could happen in the new Final Fantasy?
So there already are a good amount of dialogue choices in the game that do have impact. You will or will not see certain scenes based on your interactions with the characters. And like there are events of the game. There's one event in a scene where one of your female party members has to have a dress for a like essentially to sneak into the mayor of the manor of a yakuza boss. And based on your
What?
decisions in the previous chapter, her dress is either very basic and plain or extremely extravagant based on how you did in the last chapter, which I think is really cool.
Huh.
There's also a bit where a really traumatic event has just happened to your entire party, and you're trying to cope with it. And depending on which characters you focused on in your game, you will get a different scene of Cloud, the protagonist, going out into the garden that night and having a conversation with one of the characters, and it gives you a ton of depth for that character. You don't see the other two scenes.
Oh, so this also hosts a lot of uh, options for replayability then.
Yeah,
too.
I'm replaying the game a second time now in hard mode and trying to do things a little differently and see the stuff I didn't see, which is really, really cool. Yeah, there's a lot of like small dialogue choices. I don't think there's going to be any crazy branching narrative just because of the level of cinematic like storytelling they're doing. I think would be too expensive to do branching
that,
dialogue.
and another interesting thing. Sorry, I'm sort of going off on a still story
Yeah, go for it.
related, but tangent. Um, another story related game that I played alongside Uncharted 4, but I haven't recently. I'm probably going to do it again now that I'm talking about it. The Witcher 3,
Yeah.
and
Oh.
I played through it 3 times. Each time I tried to make different decisions, but I couldn't bring myself to, even if I wanted to experience
That's a
different.
problem I've been having with Final Fantasy VII
Yeah,
Remake.
That's a problem I have with all sort of narrative games that have that kind of choice where it's like I want to play a very specific way and I feel bad playing any other way. You
So
know?
I
there's a
feel
very
bad
small
being mean to
choice.
fictional characters, and I don't like that.
Yeah. There's a super small choice at the very start of 7 Remake where this is right after the demo ends. You meet Aerith, one of your party members, the first time, and she offers you a flower. You have two choices. One of them is to say how much, and one of them is to say, nah, I don't want it. I went back the second time, and because I want to get one of the different scenes, I want to choose the options that Aerith likes less, so I can get one of the different party member scenes at that certain point. I could not bring myself to say no because the character is done so well that she looks so defeated
Oh
when you say an
no.
option. And
Oh.
either way, you will leave that scene with the flower. You can't actually refuse the flower because if you refuse it enough, she will literally go up to you and just put it on you and be like, "Ha, take it." But like, it is so hard to actively do something that makes that character sad when the game does such a fantastic job of portraying them as like a person. It's crazy. It's such a small decision is actively very difficult.
That's the issue because I mentioned I was playing Outer Worlds. I went back because there's so many different decisions you have to make throughout that
It pushes
entire
you toward.
game.
It really pushes you towards certain decisions
Yeah.
Well,
in Outer Worlds.
but also because I played like the let's come to a compromise, boring middle ground kind of person. Um, but going back and like, oh, I'm either going to side with the deserters or I'm going to side with Edgewater or whatever. I just couldn't bring myself to decide between the two.
Yeah.
Just like more, I just couldn't do it.
Is it,
Parvati is there giving you a guilt trip.
yeah, but if you do,
Fair.
you get guilt tripped afterwards if you do it bad.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, if you honestly, because like it's worse off for everyone if you don't pick the middle ground option, like every time.
Oh, so technically the best ending is you shut down the botanical garden, bring everyone back to the mainland, and then kill the mayor of Edgewater
Yeah.
to
Or
replace him.
or you can convince him to step down and have
Yeah, you can convince
battle.
him to step down. I was being dramatic for the sake of storytelling, but yeah, you can convince him peacefully to leave, but it is heavily implied that if he leaves, he's going to die.
Oh yeah, he's found outside of the town walls 2 days dead. I think that's in the
Yeah.
the end credit cards thing.
Yeah.
I did not see that, so it's
Yeah,
hilarious.
he lasted a total of either 2 days or 2 hours, I think it was.
Yeah.
So fun fact about that actually. Because I didn't know that there was an option to come to like a middle ground between Edgewater and the botanical gardens. So I screwed over Edgewater, and what that means is that literally, if you go into the town, everyone will shoot you on sight. So what that means, and I didn't get Vicar Max as a companion. So
Oh.
I was down an
Um,
entire companion the entire game because Vicar Max just shot me on sight.
I think his personal quest is pretty fun.
I haven't
I
finished his
never
personal stuff.
I wanted to go and do it. Like there was a bunch of stuff that kept leading back to Edgewater in terms of like quests that I wanted to do. But every time I would go in to do something, everyone just started shooting me. So I was like, all right, clearly any quest that leads here is just going nowhere. So
Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is a good natural stopping point. We've been going for about an hour now, which is a
Oh
good
wow.
good discussion we've been having. So I want to get ready to end with our usual ending segment, which is a shout out. So everyone can shout out one thing. It doesn't have to be good. Doesn't have to be bad. It could be whatever you want. You could be like, "Oh, I just really didn't like the way my dog looked at me today." Which I don't know why you would say that because dogs don't look at you badly, but you could shout that out. So we're gonna start with Alex.
Oh, let's see. I did the bush last time, so I can't do that now. Shout out to my texturing program for one of my 3D projects, Substance Painter, that can no longer render metal for some reason.
which for a robot game, really, I don't really. It's not that important.
That's wonderful. I'm gonna give a shout out to the specific door in Final Fantasy VII Remake that does not load in textures and looks like it's from the PS1 because it is the door to Cloud's apartment that you visit multiple times at the start of the game, and it is the only part of the game that looks that bad, and it's hilarious every time it happens.
I'm gonna give a shout out to Microsoft Word for losing anywhere from 2 to 3 days of progress on all of my finals work. So I don't even know what else to say.
Well,
Just
I think that you described it pretty well. So
yeah.
thanks to both of you for helping out this week and being guests. And you're always welcome back. So we're going to wrap up today.
Sweet.
We might revisit this narrative conversation in the future when we all have more time. So
Thanks
It
for
was
having
fun.
me, Ryan.
Oh jeez.
thanks, Carl. It was great.
Oh, who invited Carl? Come on, guys. Who invited Carl?
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening, and we'll be back next week. Goodbye.